Hello everyone, KROW here. It's been around a little over a week since the start of Season 5, and the Top 500 leaderboard has been released much earlier than originally anticipated. Usually, it takes around 2 weeks for the leaderboard to become public, so I'm pretty surprised it got released so early. Now, it's time to sit back and enjoy the show. Well, wait a second. Speaking of sitting back, Ewan recently sent us a gaming/office chair from their CPG series. It has 4D adjustable armrests, a full-length backrest recline, and can support a weight up to 400 pounds. A couple of things I really liked about the product: with chairs I've used in the past, I've always had an issue with the armrest constantly smashing into the desk, and obviously you don't want the armrest above your desk either, because that just screws up your aim. But for the CPG, the armrest can be adjusted low enough that it's not even an issue, which is absolutely fantastic. The design and color scheme for this one is muted. I love that it's not an eyesore. I also have lower back problems, which other ergonomic chairs haven't really helped much in the past, but with CPG's ergonomic design and its complementary back and headrest, I actually haven't been feeling any lower back pain even with extended sitting time. This is also the only chair that I've used so far that makes it comfortable to keep a proper posture, and it's honestly harder to have a bad posture in this chair. And as a bonus, the box came with fingertip protection gloves to keep your hands clean and safe from pokes and scratches during assembly, so huge props to Ewan for including these in the package. And lucky for you, you can get 20% off on Ewan's ergonomic gaming/office chairs using the code KROW, KROW, at checkout, so definitely check it out. First, let's take a quick look at the Season 5 patch. We have the nerfs to Junker Queen and the buffs to Rodok, and as for DPS, Cassidy and Mei got a small rework, while Reaper, Hanzo, Widowmaker, and Tracer received slight nerfs to their kit. And finally, for supports, Lifeweaver got multiple buffs, and there's also a small nerf to Moira. Although this wasn't noted in the patch, Genji's ammo capacity was increased to 30, and as a heads up, there's a massive tier deflation right now in the upper ranks. GM players are extremely likely to derank if you retain around even a 50% win rate, which is reflected in the current Top 500 leaderboard. Many of you have been asking how the scores and tiers are calculated, so I'll be explaining it again. We scraped the Top 500 leaderboard data for each player's top 3 most played heroes, where the most played is 3 points, the second is 2 points, and the third is valued at 1 point. After grouping the point values by hero, we can plot the average on an exponential curve with the base E, which gives us the tier breaks of 400, 150, 90, and 50 points as the divisions. Then we also make tier adjustments based on the relative distribution inside each role, which is why some heroes will fall 1 tier above or below the standard cutoff range. Now to report our findings, we have for 6 months in a row Tracer in S tier. The nerf to her weapon spread has noticeably lowered her score across all regions, so now she's become a respectable S tier rather than a busted hero. Next up is Cassidy. Thanks to the rework to his mag grenade, in addition to the nerfs to both Hanzo and Widow, he's unsurprisingly made it to S tier. His new mag grenade is now one of the best ways to contest Tracers, so if Tracer happens to increase in score again, we're also likely to see Cassidy follow suit. Our third S tier hero is Hanzo. We can see a small decrease in score due to the nerf, but he still holds tight onto his S tier spot. The nerf to his max damage mostly functions as a buff to 250 HP heroes like Mei and Reaper, but with new visual effects on his Sonic Arrow, we're very likely to see Hanzo's effectiveness go down over time as players learn to adjust. In A tier, Genji is seeing an increase in score with a revert to his ammo capacity, but in terms of relative positioning in the tier list, he hasn't actually moved much compared to Season 4. Next up, we have to take special notice on Ashe. If Cassidy counters Tracer, Ashe is a hero that can counter Cassidy with her range advantage. In other words, she's officially entered the meta circle. While most of the other main DPS heroes have steadily been getting nerfed, Ashe hasn't received any kind of changes. Something we'll see later in the support list is that Mercy's effectiveness is starting to rise, and well, who pairs well with Mercy? That's right, Sojourn. That's right, it's Ashe. The nerf on Widowmaker seems to have been extremely effective. Now that her one-shot range has been decreased, even on maps with open terrain, she's gone down from a must-pick to an optional one. But Widow is still Widow. She can be a must-pick for players with outstanding aim and a must-pick for brain-dead hackers. Now we'll take a look at the heroes in the middle of the pack. Because it's still early on in the season, some of these heroes might be a little overrated, and keep in mind the variability between each season. Sombra is managing to retain her average score when we consider her effectiveness as counters to Wrecking Ball and Doomfist. This isn't too much of a surprise. In every region, especially Asia, Soldier's score has finally gone up. Compared to Europe and the Americas, the preference for Soldier in Asia has always been abysmal, but with the nerfs to Widow, we're finally starting to see the light of day for this hero. hero. And as a byproduct to the same nerfs, Pharah is also gaining traction across every server, while Sojourn is continuing to see drops in her score since her peak. And for her beloved Mei, the rework to her primary fire has rooted her playstyle as a tank counter and decreased her effectiveness as a duelist. As a result, the number of Mei 1 tricks have decreased, but she's still seeing an increase in usage. She's especially favorable right now in the Americas, but I'm sure that's just because people don't know how to shoot anything other than the tanks there. And why in the world did Reaper get nerfed? I feel like it was just for consistency across the heroes, but they might as well have given him a slight buff to bring him back up from D tier, which he's been stuck in for a while now. Next is the tanks. It's a complete mess for this role right now, and I want to touch up on two things. First is that the cutoff for top 500 is 3 to 5 tiers lower than that of other roles, and the second is that the queue times for tanks are ridiculously fast right now. This suggests that the number of tank players have significantly dropped overall from the game. One could make the argument that Junker Queen players who aren't proficient on other tanks have gone down the ranks, but because this phenomenon is happening across all three regions where Junker Queen usage is varied during Season 4, as well as the fact that Junker Queen's usage hasn't gone down that much, it wouldn't be a solid argument. It would be great if Blizzard could provide an exact explanation on what's going on here. If the number of tank players are going down, I can't quite blame them for leaving, because starting in Season 4, the rock paper scissors game for tank players has gotten pretty extreme and complex, so your proficiency and peak on a specific tank was less of a requirement for success and depended more on the understanding of counterpicks and hero interactions, increasing the requirement for game knowledge. As in real life, we don't play rock paper scissors just to have fun, it's more of a tool to make decisions, and in this case, you're playing rock paper scissors to see which team wins the game. Imagine playing rock paper scissors with 11 different hands you could play, and as a tank main myself, I can't deny that sometimes it's a complete headache. And this phenomenon is sort of reflected in the current Season 5 tank tier list. We have 2 out of the 3 S tier tanks, Winston, D.Va, and Junker Queen being the default tank picks for each region, while all of the other heroes have reasonable scores as a tool to counterpick the S tier tanks. Maybe this is what a golden meta for tanks is supposed to look like when every tank is technically viable, but with only one tank on each team, it can feel a bit more like mystery heroes and not in a particularly good way, and if your tank doesn't know how to play some of these other heroes, then, well, you end up with a one-sided match. But an interesting thing is that in Asia, Zarya has a significantly higher score than that of the other regions, so at the very least in Asia, the default rock paper scissors picks is between Winston, D.Va, and Zarya. In reverse, the rush heroes Junker Queen, Reinhardt, and Ramattra don't get much love in Asia compared to EU and the Americas. Normally, I would attribute this to the fact that Asia just always favors dive heroes and coordination, but in the current season, I speculate that tank players in Asia don't enjoy playing rush heroes because they don't particularly fit into the counter-picking game like how dive, poke, and brawl tanks do. So then, how has the Season 5 patch affected the tanks? Junker Queen's nerf seems to have made some kind of impact, but it's not super significant in terms of score value. However, I can definitely say from anecdotal evidence that Junker Queen isn't as overpowered as before, but she still has a ridiculous amount of sustain, making her still very annoying to play against. Meanwhile, the Roadhog buff has made the hero more playable, just maybe not in Asia, where Ana is basically in every single game to make him meaningless. Roadhog is kind of in this weird spot where he's just there to waddle around and dish out a bunch of damage because your team is struggling to kill the enemy tank. It would be much better if the devs could build a more distinct identity and playstyle for the hero, like giving him a lower cooldown on hook while giving up the damage, or making his damage more consistent rather than just increasing his survivability. Wrecking Ball is still rolling down the tier list, with the prevalence of Sombra, and to make matters worse, Mei's buff to her slow makes the hamster a sitting duck in most games. Unless your DPS are dominating the enemy team or you're running a full dive, he's very difficult to utilize with so many ways to counterpick him. And finally, we have Orisa. Her score has increased in each region as a counterpick primarily to Roadhog and partially Junker Queen. But in my opinion, putting all that focus onto the enemy tank as Orisa puts you at a disadvantage, because it's not like you have the utility to cover for your allies or block LOS like the upper tier tanks. She has some CC, but once you use it on the enemy tank, you can be left without any kind of protection, which makes it difficult to position and use turns effectively as Orisa. And finally, we have the supports. First, we have Lifeweaver. Although his score has definitely improved, he's still the least effective support to play. He's gone from a hero that decreases your chances of winning, even if your team is dominant, to a hero that can at the very least maintain his team's dominance. If you're losing an unfavorable position or a team matchup, he's still not much of a recommended pick to turn things around. Starting back from the top, Asia's love for Ana is just ridiculous. Time and time again, her skill set is so diverse and powerful, you'd expect a hero like this to have lower raw stats in terms of either healing or damage, but with 75 damage per shot, she can still two-shot a Tracer. I can say this every patch, but just tone her down a teeny bit and it would be so amazing. In second place, we have KROW. Like we mentioned in the previous tier list, her playstyle is extremely different between Asia and the West. We generally see KROW played in a double flex support composition, but in Asia, KROW is much more frequently played with Winston to remove a targetable backline from a traditional dive composition. Brigitte is on a sweetheart right now. The double flex support composition is starting to look significantly weaker with the presence of Brig, especially at the higher levels of play. Playing her with a more defensive playstyle like peeling for Ana or another squishy seems to be the best way to play her in the current meta, and we can see this in the Overwatch League as well. A double flex support composition only tends to appear as a plan B, and they generally run an Ana Brig composition as the default backline. Interestingly, this isn't the case in Europe or the Americas. I want to make a strong argument that knowing how to play and position as Brig is going to be extremely valuable in Season 5. Instead, the West is starting to utilize Mercy instead of Brig, reflected by the changes in Mercy's score. This is a result of main DPS heroes being nerfed over time, so now they get noticeable value out of a Mercy pocket more than they did before. With multiple ways to avoid her additional 1.5 second active ability state appearing left and right, she's starting to become more difficult to pick off like before in Season 4. Another notable support is Moira. The buff added in Season 4 allowing her to fade in the middle of her ult is starting to see the light of day, greatly increasing her viability. Furthermore, her use in the Overwatch League is starting to have an impact at the highest levels of play as well. In reverse, Lucio is starting to lose in score as a result of Junker Queen's nerf. Because the nerf decreased the survivability of her teammates during Shout, this has increased the demand for healing and has made the original Junker Queen rush style less viable in a competitive play. Instead, KROW, Ana, or Mercy seems to be the new backline to pair with Junker Queen for more stability and sustain. From this, we can hypothesize that Lucio just isn't a hero that defines a meta, but one that gets defined by the meta instead, kind of like Reaper. That's all for today, folks, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next one.